An email form instead of the mailed one. We're trying to stretch things, make it more suitable to more people. Also, after the screen is put down is the bicentennial mural that we had painted for the bicentennial in 2017. So I still like looking at it. It's got a lot of detail to it. And also too, we have a building project going on to build a new building, our community life museum, this stuff. And so we're working on that, so you'll see more details coming. Gerry said he would handle the introduction himself, so Gerry, I'll turn it over to you.
Yep. Thank you, sir. So first I'd like to thank Diane back there in the corner. We came in yesterday to make sure, the key to success in the Army and the military is rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal. And we brought my computer and that projector and nothing worked. So she went home and got it all working, so thank you very much. But what I want to talk about is, she said I have about 3 hours, I think. So I'm trying to get it. But in an hour, I want to talk about a trip that I did in relationship to the profound impact that the original journey had on the United States and the Western expansion of this country. And it's a trip that we call Ashley's Return that we did in 2019, recreating the trip of William Henry Ashley, and I'll get into more detail. But as you can see underneath, the whole thing took 2 years of planning and preparation. Everything from, making all of our clothes to making saddles. And afterwards, if you go up, how many people ride horses? I know that back there's a couple. You should come up and look at the saddle that we rode. If you ride a modern saddle, you're going to laugh, but 700 miles on that thing. To figure out the trip, where he went, where we could go and where we couldn't go based on modern cities and things like that. Our trip actually ended up being a lot harder than his for a few things that I'll get into as I go through it. But we started on July 6th. And we finished on October 8th of 2019. Incidentally, Ashley and his crew started on July 2nd, and they finished on October 4th, so 4 days apart on either end. So for both of us, it was a 95-day journey. And also, before I get going too, I'm going to try to just hit the highlights of the journey, but if you want to get into more details about some of the experiences and things we did, you can go on the National Muzzle Loading Rifle Association's webpage, NMLRA, and if you become a member for $30 a year or whatever, you can get their Muzzle Blast magazine. It's actually a very good magazine. You two need to get this. Okay. But in there from October, November, December of 21, January, February 22, there's a series of 5 articles that I wrote called A Splendid Wayfaring in the 21st Century. And that comes from Ashley, a book about him called A Splendid Wayfaring and his career in trapping. So next slide. So this is William Henry Ashley, and what he did in 1822 or so is he was a trapper himself. He was a woodsman. He was a hunter. He was a scout. He was also a businessman. Although he was a very horrible businessman, he didn't make a lot of money. He went into black powder. They were taking bat guano with his partner Andrew Henry and trying to make black powder, and of course to them it was just powder, but and had a lead mine and wasn't very successful. But his ultimate goal was to try to make some money so that he could enter into politics, which he eventually did and became the first lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri. So he advertised in 1822 for 100 men to go west and hunt beaver. Okay, we call it trapping beaver, they call it hunting. They hunt the beaver because the beaver felt hat was all the rage. And beaver had been trapped out of Europe, they'd been trapped out of the east. Now they had to go west to get beaver. So he sent 100 guys out there starting about 1822. About 1824, he realizes, holy smokes, I sent these guys out there. It's been 2 years. I've not had any correspondence. I've not resupplied them. And they're, hunting beaver for me, for my business, which ends up becoming the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. So he leaves Fort Atkinson on the Missouri River in the fall of 1824. He makes the journey out. He crosses Nebraska and cuts down to Wyoming. He loses a man on the trip. He gets severe frostbite, loses horses, loses a lot of gear, but he's taking supplies out there to resupply his men who needed new saddles, they needed knives, they needed guns, they needed everything. to resupply, because most of them were, were living with the native tribes just to survive. They had nothing. They were, 2-3 years in the woods. So he gets out there in 1824, 1825 in the spring, and he holds what's called the first rendezvous. The rendezvous where all the trappers would come in, and they would bring their hides in and turn them over to the fur companies that they worked for. Then they would get paid, or most cases just take whatever pay they had and buy supplies to go back out again. So the only people that made any money in the fur trade were the fur company owners. Every single trapper out there was broke, destitute, or died, or came back with nothing and went back into apprenticeship as something. So he, Ashley's 100, that's the original advertisement that he took out in St. Louis, Missouri. Next. Okay, so to put it in perspective, in 2017, my friend Jack Mitz says to me, Jerry, a lot of people ride into Rendezvous, and I said, yeah, because we'll do living history events, and people ride their horses in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. He goes, but nobody ever leaves. And I said, what do you have in mind? He said, well, I want to leave the original rendezvous site of the first rendezvous in 1825 and go back. And I said, how far? And he said, well, all the way to St. Louis. And stupid me, the only words that came out of my mouth were, I'm in. And we didn't even know what this entitled. We didn't know what modes of transportation, what route, nothing. So we had to do all the research and all the prepping, all of the making gear and the training. And the original map, this is southwest Wyoming today, which is Flaming Gorge. If you ever have a chance to go out there, when the sun sets, the waterfalls look like they're on fire. And he didn't have enough horses and time to go from that rendezvous site straight line to St. Louis and get the horses back to his trappers who need to go back up into the Rockies and trap. So he realizes there are a couple things that come into play. He has to get to the first navigable water that he can find, and that's actually the Bighorn River here, right on the Montana border. So he knows that he has to ride from southwest Wyoming, and he's able to follow the Green River, the Black River, and other series of rivers up to what's now Fort Smith, Montana, where he builds 23 bull boats, which I'll get into that, but it's a buffalo hide boat, and they float down the Bighorn River to the Yellowstone River to the Missouri River. Now the Missouri River, he stops at Fort Union, which is interesting. Now keep in mind, William Ashley is a former general in the Army, and when I get into the keelboat part, he meets General Atkinson, who's on a flotilla going up the river to make treaties with the Indians and do trading. So he goes to the Missouri River, and he puts his hides and some of his men on a military and Army boat, because back then there was no Navy, it's all Army, and he floats down to St. Louis, which kind of brings us to the conjecture that he and Atkinson, we know, knew each other in the service in the military, and they probably had some gentleman's agreement. You get to the Missouri River in this time frame, I'll bring you down the river, even though it's pretty much illegal, even back then. So we had to figure this whole thing out. So before I continue, what's important about this trip is when he gets out here, he sets up the first fur trade rendezvous. So number one, he sets up a system to bring supplies out to the trappers, but also just volumes, just tons and wagons, and just like you can't even, in today's terms, if you looked at a trade list, what went out on one-to-one rendezvous, it's literally like an entire Walmart store going out, but probably more. I mean, 50, 60, 80, wagons, with each different trader going out, driving 300-400 head of cattle, a couple of hundred pigs. They took tons of steel to repair weapons, to repair traps. They took, iron. They took everything you can imagine. And knives. We're talking not, a couple of dozen. We're talking gross of knives, multiple gross of knives. We're talking material. So they get out there. This sets up the whole trade system, allows trappers and white men to go west and to hunt beaver, but then to be able to get resupplied and stay out there long term. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it really opens up trade with the Native Americans out there, because they now start getting materials. Everybody thinks the mountain men made their own clothes. They didn't make their own clothes. Okay, they traded with the Indians for Indian-made, Indian-style buckskin when their cloth wore out. Then, once the Indians got material, they learned how to make clothing out of material, then they would trade it to the white men to replace their clothing, and eventually the Indians would make, you know, buckskins using white man patterns. So it kind of opens up this whole trade, you know, between the white men and the Indians and that whole process, and it opens up, completely opens up and blows open, you know, historically, if you like it or not, Western expansion. That's the whole key to Western expansion is Ashley's trip. And there's some great tie-ins, I'll get to it. But so that's the journey that we had to figure out. 700 miles on horseback, 400 down the canoe by bull boat in Pirogue. We weren't able to shoot 23 buffalo. They're about 5,000 apiece. So we just made one, and then we took 1825 style wooden flat bottom skiffs, we call them today, but pirogues, and floated to Bighorn and Yellowstone. And in Missouri, we actually picked up a keel boat and went down 900 miles in a keel boat. So, and I guess when I did the journey, it just, you know, you just, one day after the other, you're just kind of going, and then you get home and you look at this map and you realize how far you traveled and how close you were to Canada. It's kind of mind-blowing. Just puts it in perspective. This is on the initial ride, crossing our first river and making a bull boat. Next slide. So there's only 3 of us that did the whole trip, like William Ashley did. This is Jack Mitch. He concocted this idea in his mind, so he's totally guilty for all of it. Amish lives about 300 yards away from him. They're good friends. And then obviously myself. And this is at another event that we were at together. But people say and ask us, you know, why did you do this? You know, and we thought about it and talked about it every night for 95 nights. And really the only reason we come up with is why not? You know, I mean, do you want to look back in your life and say we should have done this? You know, and we just, why not? And the other thing is to prove to ourselves that we can do it. So keep in mind, Ashley's men, they're all in their early 20s, okay? Jack is in his mid-60s when he does it. He's in his mid-40s, I'm in my mid-50s. So we're 2 to 3 times their age doing the same trip. So, and again, we did it as pretty close to what they did as we could do. Next. So in the world of travel by horse, this is everything that I took with me on the journey, less one bag that's on a pack horse. But this is my Mustang Bubbles, and every day you get up and you pack it. You've got your bedroll, a blanket, my buckskin coat, which is 95 degrees. Why would you take a coat? Well, it's the only relief you get from mosquitoes at night is put on that buckskin coat. I mean, everything you read for Discovery, anything you read about the mosquitoes out west and on the Missouri River, it's true times 5. It's miserable. Handmade saddlebags, which in there I kept a cooking kit, which was just a pot and a coffee cup is all I ate out of, and then of course a knife and a spoon, or a fork and a spoon.
You carry them up.
Huh?
Hold them up.
Oh, pot. Yep. So this is my cooking pot for 95 days. And then the coffee cup which goes with it, which nests down inside it. You throw that in your saddlebag. And that's, so, you know, you sit down to dinner every day, you throw out all these plates and dishes and stuff. I'm here to tell you, you don't need it. Saddle, rifle slung across, 2 canteens, and then of course my shooting bag and my powder horn hanging off the side. The bridle halter are hand sewn, handmade by a friend of mine, and the halter's a military style, the bridle's a civilian style from 1825, and then what we think is a Spanish saddle, which is over here, handmade and hand tacked out by a friend of mine, Conan Asmussen. So all that gear is probably 50 pounds, and then me on the horse. So, okay, next. So on the first journey, on the ride, 700 miles, and this is me on the horse. I was actually sicker than a dog and sleeping while I was riding. These are the pack horses. This is Curly, he's a mule actually. And every day you get up and you have, you know, the pack saddle bag, the panniers they're called. We have some copper canteens with water. Then we have our bedrolls on top. and it has to be weighed every single day you get up, and this is us weighing the gear, because it has to be the same weight on each side, otherwise the load shifts and it'll fall off. So every day they gotta be, you know, and this is Conan, or Han Asmussen and his son Conan, and they were very picky, it had to be the same weight, not a pound off, the same weight, every day. And every day you're eating, you're using, and so it's changing every day, and some things don't go back in the same bag. So we had 6 riders and 9 horses. These are the 3 pack horses back here. This is actually the very first stop on the very first day. So for the people that ride, to put it in perspective, we averaged about 30 to 35 miles a day, every day, day in and day out. And it was probably in the 95 to 100 degree range every day. And what made our trip, can you go back a slide? Back to the map, one more. Okay, so what made our trip harder is here in Wyoming, right in here you have Riverton, Wyoming. Ashley's able to ride straight north following the river, skirting the mountains. In fact, send some guys in the mountains to pick up a cache of hides, and he gets up to the Bighorn River. You can see our route was way out and around. I was in charge of trying to get permission to ride through the Crow Reservation in Riverton, Wyoming. Could never get permission, they wouldn't let us. So we actually have to ride further west into the Red Desert. The Red Desert is, you know, they're on water and grass every day along rivers, and we're out in the middle of nowhere with very little water and very little grass for the horses. So we had to go a lot further east to come back to head north to Montana. So, back. So every day this is what it looks like. So I really hate sage, because it's sage and sage and sage. But, so this is what we had to ride through, as opposed to them, you know, being on the rivers and the green grass and the fishing and the hunting. And the other thing that we had to do that they didn't have to do is we had to carry food. They didn't carry food. They hunted their way along. If a horse went lame, they shot it and ate it. You know, you don't waste anything. We had to take all our food because we couldn't hunt. We tried to get survival permits from different DECs, and they wouldn't give them to us. They said, you shoot all the rabbits and squirrels you want in every state we asked. Well, I know why. Because there are no squirrels and rabbits. So we saw 1 squirrel. Next. So again, this is basically the Red Desert. If you ever seen a cowboy movie with the parched lips and the blistering because there's no water, yeah, been there, got the T-shirt. 2 days with no water. It was all like, I wouldn't call it alkali water. The horses would drink it, but it clogged up our, you know, modern gear. We did take a couple things. One is you have to take a water filter. The water out west, because all the grazing, you'll get Giardia like day 1. So, but the water, you know, just clogged up our filters, and it was not drinkable. And so we went 2 days with no water. And the ride with the 6 guys, very interesting crew. There's me, this is Conan Asmussen. So he's a farrier and a horse trainer. So he brought his farrier equipment, spare horseshoes, everything he needed. This is his father, Han. Han is a homeopathic doctor. He's a chiropractor. He's an acupuncturist, and he is a horse rider and trainer. To this day, he gets up every morning and rides 10 to 15 miles on his horse, 365 days a year. This guy, this is Dixon Varner. If you go look at the Veterinarian Hall of Fame, this guy was just inducted a year ago. He's the #1 equine stallion geneticist in the world. He travels the world doing genetics, even though, you know, he comes back from trips like this, shaves his beard, and goes and does seminars around the world. And then there's Jack and Scott. So again, Ashley gets to follow the rivers, he gets the water and the grass. We have to go in the desert and carry the food, and we have to take a much longer route to get around up to Fort Smith, Montana. Relaxing. So every day, the routine is you stop. First thing you take care of is your animals. You find grass, you pick your animals out. Then you come back, you build a fire. And actually the one blessing about sage is the dead and dried sage, it's like a hardwood, so it holds a spark. So in the morning there's always ashes to start a fire. It burns well. So we immediately start cooking some kind of dinner. We carried raw meat in the saddlebags, and the raw meat gets put on top of that tripod and it gets smoked every night. It lasts about 14 days, and then it starts getting green and rotten. And at that point, you don't throw it away. You give it to Han, and he eats it. He eats anything. And he ate all the green meat, a pot of coffee for the morning, a 2-gallon pot we'd all drink in the morning. And then in the morning, you know, you take your little pot of cooking utensil, you make your oatmeal, you throw some dried fruit and berries and nuts in it, you eat your oatmeal every morning. And that's a routine. And then in the morning, of course, you weigh out all your saddlebags, pack the saddle. You pack your own horse first, then you pack the pack animals, and then you take off. And every day, day in, day out. Next. So now William Ashley gets up to the Bighorn River, and he needs to build bull boats. So he took 50 guys, all the horses of his employees, and all of his hides, and they ride to the Bighorn River. And at the Bighorn River, he sends 25 guys back. He keeps 23 guys. They end up shooting 23 buffalo, and they build the bull boats, which is you build a willow frame, okay, and these are all lashed with nothing but sinew or reeds or whatever we had to lash them with, and then you stretch a buffalo hide over it, and then it dries, and then you lash that on with rawhide. And we built this one right on the site. But he built 23 of these. Maybe more, we don't know, but we know that documentation says 23, so 23 it is. And they float down the Bighorn River with all the hides. We ended up using these flat-bottom skiffs or pirogues that we catamaran together, just like the dugout canoes to float down the river. And so we launched from pretty close to the same spot he did in Fort Smith, Montana. So just like Ashley gets there, sends his horses back, we get there, and we call a friend. We did have to take a cell phone because we have to be able to do logistical coordination. So we call a friend. They fly into Billings, Montana. They came down with my truck and Scott's trailer, picked up the horses and took them back, just like Ashley's horses went back with his men. And then we stayed and built these and took off down the river. Next. So as we're floating down the river, it's very interesting because we meet, first of all, in Wyoming on the horseback ride, people started to find out about us and knew about us before we got there. And they would tell everybody that, hey, there's these crazy guys coming, all kinds of stuff. And, one of the stops we stopped at, Cindy Smith, we were talking to her about her hay. She's growing some really beautiful, weed-free alfalfa. They got the watering system, so her and I are talking about it. And I'm telling her, my Uncle Joe, he'd be just like jealous if he could see this hay, and stuff. And I said, and she says, where'd you start your trip? And I said, well, on the farm, on Joe Hickey's ranch down in Lone Tree, Wyoming. She just kind of laughed and said, that field I was cutting when you came up, Joe Hickey bought all that hay. So everybody knew everybody along the way. And on the river portion too, we met another guy, I can't think of his name right now, but we got talking to him about had the Yellowstone River changed. He kind of chuckled, said, I'll be right back. He goes in his bedroom, he pulls out maps and starts laying out maps, and these are all original pre-Civil War maps of the Yellowstone River with depth measurements for the keel boats. And he says this river, he said, basically other than deep points changing, he said it's unchanged except for a 2-mile stretch where they took gravel out to build a railroad. And he's found all kinds of artifacts in there. This is actually, they're pointing at the August something, I can't remember the exact day, of the camp of Clark, who's returning with the Corps Discovery. He's going down the Yellowstone River and he's meeting Lewis at what is now in existence called Fort Union, and he camps here on the side of the Yellowstone River. We ended up camping on the left side of the river and then went over in the morning, and there were some cottonwoods that are, just ginormous that you knew were there when Clark came through with his guys. It was very, very neat. And we stopped almost within, I think if I went back and looked at the journal of Lewis and Clark and ours, within 2 days, we stopped at the same location within 2 days. This is drying gear out. So at one point we're on on the, I guess we're on the Yellowstone at that point. It starts raining. We pull off the side of the river, we throw on our rain ponchos, we're hunkered down under some trees, and we're sitting there passing pipe around and just kind of like, woe is me, this kind of sucks, we're gonna get really soaked and stuff, we're all just kind of laughing and, wondering what we're doing. So then the rain quits, we get back in the bull boat that grows and take off down the river, and all of a sudden the big black cloud is over top, and we're like, we need to get off the river, like now. So we hit an island, built a fire, got some dinner on us, some coffee, and then the storm started to come in, and the storm was so bad, we just, the whole time we just laid on the ground in camp, but we laid down, the three of us right next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, pull the canvas over, I'm on one side, Jack's on the other, Scott's in the middle, we're just holding it down, and the wind is blowing, and it's like, you can't explain it, and how hard it's blowing, and I peek out, and I watch the logs on the fire go, whoop, boosh, down the river, just like that, gone, and it's like sandblast in my face. The next morning I get up, and I'm like, Jack, did you hear the freight train last night? And he's like, yep, sure did. And if you don't know what that is, a freight train is a tornado overhead. If you ever hear one overhead, they sound like a freight train. So the next day we see Ed Bile, whose land we were on, he goes, oh yeah, the tornado jumped right over you guys, went down, destroyed this town, hit that town, and everything else. And he said the winds where you were on the ground, he said, the weather said they were hitting 80 miles an hour.
Awesome.
So, and Jack and I were both, the next day we're chuckling about how we're laying there going, wow, our wives are never going to know where the hell our bodies are at. But we survived. So that was one of the coldest nights. It took about an hour and a half, three of us, to get a fire going. Everything was wet and soaked, and we're down there just blowing, trying to get a fire going. And that was the best cup of coffee I ever had. This is at the finish point at the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri River. This is what's called Fort Union, which the river used to be, the Missouri River used to be just on this far wall, and this was not at all a military post. It was called Fort Union, but it was owned by trade companies, and at any given time there was over 10,000 Indians camped around this, and then at one point there's the Irregular build off to the left. They build log cabins with streets and avenues and everything, and it's a big trading post for everybody. And what's funny about this is we get here and we ask them to sleep in the fort, and they didn't want to let us because insurance purposes, they didn't want us having a fire in there because there's nobody on duty at night. And they're like, well, we'll just camp in the field, we've been living under the stars, but it's not going to bother us. So like, well, we have a teepee, and we're like, oh, we'll take a teepee. I mean, that's like 4-star, So they come out, they're helping us set up this teepee, and there's one of the park rangers, Joseph Yellowtail, the last name ought to tell you something. He's helping us set up the teepee, and I said, do you know what we're doing with this Ashes return trip? He just kind of chuckles and says, yeah, I know all about your trip. And I said, well, how'd you hear about it? He goes, I'm 100% Irregular. My great-grandfather was in the warring party that killed 2 of Ashley's men during this trip. Can't make it up. Can't make it up. There he is at Fort Union. So, finishing up. Now we get to the Missouri River, and things aren't bad enough that we're in the Red Desert on horse. The Bighorn River and the Yellowstone flow consistently northeast, zigzag. So it doesn't matter what you do, you're always into the wind. And it's just a miserable journey down. But it's kind of nice. You get down in the river, you don't see anything. You go for days without seeing anybody. All you see is bald eagles. Once we get away from Fort Smith, Montana, we're away from all the fishermen, and it's just quiet. It's eerie. And then you walk up to the bank and you look around, and you're like, oh, there's a farm, and you're like, good. You go back down the river, and you go back in next. So then we get to the third leg of the journey. So Jack, Amish, and I have determined that we are going to do this whole thing, and if we don't have a keel boat, we're going to go down the Missouri River in canoes. It's just the way it is. We're going to do the whole thing. And so we're talking to this knucklehead, Bill Bailey, one day at camp, and he says, I'll build a keel boat. And we're like, really? He's like, yeah, it's on my bucket list. I'm like, who has a keel boat on their bucket list to build? But Bill did. And And Bill, so this is a great shot because this is Bill. This is a barn. He has built several forts, like recreated, like Fort Pompaqua or whatever it's called. Now he's redoing the one in Lawton. He's done a couple others. He's done log cabinets for movie sets. The guy's a master craftsman, master woodworker, and he travels around. He fixes up barns or forts or whatever. His latest project right now, he's building the fort in Lawton, Oklahoma, the Museum of the Great Plains, and he's one guy. He's building a whole fort with a trade house, with stockades, with walls. And he's telling me, it's good, you know, he said, there's no way I can hand hew the logs, but they have to be hand hewn. This guy is so good of a craftsman and carpenter. This turkey right here built a hydraulic hewing machine that he just fed logs into with hydraulic axes and adze that hewed the logs. So he would travel around, like this is one of his clients. He's got this boat, this keel boat on a trailer, and he's working for the client from 8 to 5. He has dinner, he said, and then he would work from like 6 to midnight or 1 in the morning on the keel boat, and then work for the client during the day. And he did this for a year nonstop. And what's interesting about this keel boat is it's about a third to half scale of the original Muskrat that Ashley's men are on. But Butch Bouvier and a couple others have keel boats on the Missouri and on the Mississippi. They do tours. They look great from the outside, but underneath they're steel, they're foam. You know, there's the insurance consideration because they do tours and guided tours. Well, Butch tutored him and found him the books, and he built our keel boat true to 1825. Lumber, style, construction, everything. He had to figure out wood content, the moisture content, and the siding, so he knew the gap, and then he would use tar and oakum and fill the cracks, and then based on the moisture content, when it hit the water, it would swell up and seal it. And just like the original keel boats of 1825, this thing leaked from the top, the bottom, the sides, everywhere. There's still tar on my shirt from crawling under the bow and the stern and patching holes in there at night at the end of a day's journey. But it's totally true to form. The only difference is up front we only have 2 oars, where sometimes they had 6 to 12, but we could only get 3 of us to go on the entire journey. We only had Bill that we knew of that was going to go on a keel boat, so only 4 of us. So you got to have a guy in the rudder, you got to have 2 in the oars, another guy doing depth with a pole. So we had to scale it down. And unfortunately, it did have to meet all of the Coast Guard requirements, including a serial number and a bunch of other things. But this is one of our first stops in the keel boat, which had a mast as well that we used from time to time. But the difference between our keel boat journey and Ashley's keel boat journey, that is a huge difference, is in 1825, the Missouri River is, they used to say, the Missouri River is too thin to plow, too thick to drink. And it's a mile wide and 3 feet deep. So when they're out there in keel boats going up and down, they're out with men and ropes towing the keel boats up the river and then floating down, or horses and cordelling, they call it cordelling the keel boat up and down. And they don't have to deal with, you know, the wind and depth and all that. So it's a totally different Missouri River, and you would be shocked at the number of people on the Missouri River that didn't know that. They had no clue. So here we come in 2019. Now the Missouri River, there was one stretch at the very beginning from Yankton for 3 days that was as it was in 1825, all the snags and the braided stream and everything else like that. But then you get that down, and the Corps of Engineers has now canalized it. It's now 300 yards wide, and it's 50 feet deep. Except in 2019, it's 22 feet above flood stage. So we went under bridges that had lot markings on the bridge abutments, and one of them, it was at the 88-foot mark. So that we're on an 88-foot deep section of the river. So now we don't have the ability to tow it or to take our time or move. We're now in a captured current of anywhere from 6 to 7 on a normal river, 6 to 7 miles an hour, to now in a flooded Missouri River that's going at like a 9 to 10 or 11 miles per hour nonstop. So back then the current was maybe 3 miles an hour. So we're at 2 to 3 times the speed. we're at much deeper depths. And then some other phenomena that happen on the Missouri River now is, if you have a snag under the river, and like a cottonwood tree or something, and it busts loose and washes down the river, it creates a void, it creates a whirlpool, the water drops and creates this whirlpool. And it actually took this keelboat down 6 feet, spun us around all the way like a 90-degree turn and brought us up, and we were, you know, perpendicular to the river and had to straighten the boat out. So he didn't have to deal with that stuff, and we have to deal with it. So it's a very, very dangerous river. In fact, 2019 was not the most damage from a flood, but it was the highest flood level in the history of the Missouri River. And but they had done some levee and dike work. So we get down to Omaha, Nebraska, and there was a flash flood watch that hit, but ended up taking out some levees and stuff upstream from us, so it didn't take us out. And then we got, I can't remember what little village we're in, but a railroad bridge upstream from us, from a tributary coming in, had debris stacked up more than 1/4 mile, and they actually sent a railroad guy out to cut the tracks, and they let the railroad bridge wash out, and we stood on the banks. We took everything off the keelboat in case it was going to get crushed. And Bill and I were up at midnight, and a local guy came down with his headlights on the truck, and we watched an island of railroad tracks and bridge debris, you know, probably 100 feet by 50 feet in size floating down the river. And so it's a much different, much more dangerous journey than Ashley, you know, even thought about making, other than he's dealing with Indians shooting at him. We didn't know that, but he also gets to hunt and eat. So the Missouri, I just had a funny story about the Missouri River. Coming into Omaha, Nebraska. So the only place to land in Omaha is a marina right in downtown Omaha. So I'm up on the bow of the keelboat. I got a rope and stuff, and Bill's coming in, and he's drifting. You know, and you drift in and you turn the keelboat and kind of land on the dock. And I'm up there on the bow of this thing with the rope. And then I think Amish was on the stern with the rope and stuff. That was kind of our positions. And as we're drifting in this flooded river, I'm standing there staring at this 9/11 memorial set of statues. And it's about 15 feet underwater, so just the tops of the heads of the soldiers and sailors are sticking out. And this keelboat's drifting towards it, and the only thing going through my mind was, how are we going to pay for that statue when this boat takes it out? Sure. You know, that's the only thing I can think of, is how are we going to pay for that? And I'm thinking, this thing is millions, and I said, yeah, we're in trouble. And Captain Bill turns and lands it perfectly. And then another point on the trip, we're cruising. Now, we hadn't seen another person, another boat in days. This twin 150s pulls up, and it's, you know, 2 game wardens, and it's in the middle of a flood. We've been checking, you know, the news, and they were talking to people, they were throwing people off the river, and these 2 game wardens pull up, and they said, "Where you headed, boys?" And Jack says, "St. Louis." He just laughs and said, "No, really, where you headed?" He goes, "Really, St. Louis." And his face his jaw just drops. He's like, "Really?" And we're like, "Yeah, tie off to the boat, we'll tell you the story." So we told him what we're doing and everything else. He hands us a business card, says, "If you need anything, get a hold of me." Takes off in his boat. So, but Bill built this whole thing on the road. Took him a year. Next, and very interesting. This is Omaha. This is where we almost hit the statue. And you know, you put it in perspective. You're on this boat. All these guys in his gear. It weighs about 9,000 pounds, all loaded and wet. And then you see it on the Missouri River, and it's just like you're just a little blip. One little burp from that river and you're gone. We did have life jackets. We did take life jackets. We're not totally crazy. And the other modern thing that we took that Jack's wife and Kathy would not negotiate on is we had a beacon, and every night you turn the beacon on, you hit a button, it sends a 10-digit grid coordinate to Kim Mitch, and then she would track us on the map, so they knew. So if something happened, they knew where we were the night before. And then if we had an emergency where we need a life flight, ambulance, or something, you just hit the button. You turn on, hit the button, and it automatically sends a message, and they send whatever in they get. And we had that. And this is, I don't remember what that is, somewhere stopping Missouri River. Next. 2 great shots. This is actually South Dakota. We're coming around a corner, and all of a sudden a fog sets in. And this is the section that is just like it was in 1825. So you have all the snags and everything sticking out, and this fog sets in, and our visibility is about from here to that wall, and that's it. So for about 3 or 4 hours, we're in this fog. Everybody's up with poles, pushing snags out of the way. We don't even know if we're, perpendicular to the river, if we're near a bank, if we're in the middle of nowhere. And we had to make our way through that. It was kind of cool because you turn around, look at the stern, and the sun was back there, and there's this halo around us. It was kind of like, all right, we're all right, we'll be good. This I think is in Herman, Missouri, at night. Next. So this is at the finish point of the journey, and again, you can't make this stuff up, okay? So we pull into the finish point. We actually stopped one small village north because we didn't want to get into all the commercial traffic of St. Louis, and there was no good places to land in St. Louis proper for a keelboat, and to get the keelboat out, because we have to get it out at this point. But Kathy's there. This little old lady comes down to the thing and asks Kathy what's going on. So Kathy tells her the story. Have any of you heard of John Coulter, the mountain man? John Coulter was with the Corps of Discovery with Lewis and Clark. John Coulter was the only guy that was allowed to lead the Lewis and Clark journey before they returned, because remember, they're all in the military. It's a corps. It's the Corps of Journey. They're all under Army control. But they gave John Coulter a pass and let him lead. John Coulter is the first white man to see Old Faithful, all the tar pits, Yellowstone, and all of that stuff. And he was made fun of for years. They laughed at him, said, "Oh, nothing like that exists." They call it Coulter's Hell, and made fun of him until other trappers went in there. This lady is John Coulter's great-granddaughter. Direct descendant, she's a Coulter. It's her father's father's father. And she shows up down at the thing to land. And we had just the day before been to the Coulter Memorial, because nobody knows where he's buried, because he died somewhere out in the wilderness. And we were at the Coulter Memorial, and like 2 days later, his great-granddaughter shows up. You can't make it up. And I think that's it. Questions? So, what I have up here, if you want to take a peek at, I've got the saddle, my eating stuff, and then I brought some powder horns, some originals, and some modern made ones, and then you can take a look at the muzzle blast if you want to subscribe to that, and perfect timing for questions. Yeah.
How long did it take you to, not the breakfast, but just to pack up every morning?
Pack up was about an hour, I think. No watches, but about an hour. So and what's interesting is the days in Wyoming in the summer are very long. So I don't really know what time it got light, but you get up, you have breakfast like at the first, at the crack of dawn, and then you take about an hour to pack, and then you ride for 8 or 10 hours. But about an hour to get everything packed up. Saddle your horses.
For the horse section.
For the horse section.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, the canoe section was just a matter of packing our bags, throwing them in the pirogue and taking off. And the keel boat, we slept, some of us on shore. I slept on top of the keel boat to try to avoid the mosquitoes. And so all your gear stays on the boat. So you just kind of get up, have breakfast, and launch and go. So, come on.
How many bull boats did you have?
One.
Just one.
Just one. Yep. One bull boat. Related to the Iroquois Nation, by the way, in the fur trade era, the only person that I can find that came out of this Finger Lakes region, the only name we know him as is Fitzgerald. And we don't know if he's a white but actually we think he's a Iroquois, member of the Iroquois Nation, but we don't know which tribe. Fitzgerald goes west and traps, and I have read first-person documentation that they found Fitzgerald's body dead in a creek, and everybody around was very sad because he was a good friend, he was a good fighter, he was a good trapper, he was very highly respected. So that's the only thing I found for people out of the Finger Lakes region that went into the west, into the fur trade, is Fitzgerald. It's kind of interesting, yeah.
How many guys would fit in them bull boats? Like just one guy?
One, just one guy. One guy.
One guy sitting on the furs or what?
Yeah, actually, the Ashley's men would have been one guy in a bull boat, and he would have had bull boats tied to his bull boat with furs in them, dragging behind him. And he would have, you don't really steer them, you just kind of float along with them, and with the current and go. There's that, Dan?
You said that it took a year for him to build the key bolt. How long was it from idea to first day on the horse?
For the trip?
Yeah, not how long the trip was. You said that was 95
Yeah.
days, but from when your friend said, let's do this, and you said, sure, and then you got out a horse.
2 years.
Started 2 years.
Yep, so when he came to me with the idea in June, late June of 17, and it wasn't until late June, the 28th of June of 19, that I actually drove west to meet Jack and to head out. So it was a full 2 years. Yep. I had a couple other thoughts for questions, but they left me. Come on, ask me something. Don't let me off.
Lose any weight doing this?
Oh my God. I went from 220 to 173.
Wow.
Yeah, I lost weight, and we spent 3 full moons, and I lost whatever that math is, 47 pounds. Yep. Yep.
I think you might have answered one of my questions, which is how did you get out there? So you drove?
We drove.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my other question is, what kind of food did you take with you?
So we took raw meat and dried beans, dried peas, dried fruit and nut mix, some oatmeal, some seasonings, dried corn.
Tell about what you ate as soon as you parked every night and the horse park. You had those 3 items.
Oh yeah, the one thing we carried is, it's in Hawaiian it's called pupus, which is appetizer. So every night while after you get all your horses and camp set and one of the guys is cooking, you cut up fresh cabbage, garlic, cheese, ginger, and you pass that around and you eat that every night. That's your kind of your roughage and settles your stomach, and the garlic's supposed to keep mosquitoes away. I can tell you that's cool. It doesn't work, it didn't do a thing. But that was what we had every night before we had the meal. Cabbage lasts in a saddlebag 30, 35, 40 days. You just peel the outer leaves and just eat it.
So I think that's what kept them healthy the whole ride.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody got sick.
On the ranch you had all that.
Well, that was your vitamin C. and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
got your-
Yep.
Did you see,
What about,
Yep, Mom, so hold on.
okay.
I just wondered, did you see many snakes?
So we, on the ride, we saw, okay, so that's an interesting point. So on the ride, we only saw and heard, we saw 2 rattlesnakes and heard 1. And then we went through South Pass, Wyoming, which was discovered as a southern way to get through the Rocky Mountains. So we're there in July in South Pass. South Pass is the largest breeding ground habit of grizzly bears in the entire country. And we went through all of South Pass and never saw a single one. Because it was so hot, the elk and the bear were up in the mountains to stay cool. And then we went through areas that were, I'll tell you another thing. We went through areas that people said, oh yeah, this is the rattlesnake capital, blah, blah, blah. Never saw one there. Never saw one. One of the funny things about the ride too, this was something I wanted to talk about, is we stopped at the Hayes Ranch, which none of you know what that is, but I'm going to tell you. We stopped at the Hayes Ranch and we camped about a quarter mile from where the barn stood, where Butch Cassidy and his Sundance Kid used to ride to get fresh horses on the Hayes Ranch. And we camped on that ranch and got the whole history of that from the ranch manager. Steve?
Couple of questions. One, on bull boats, was that, like, what scale was that to the relative? You might have said.
Oh, exact
Exact
copy. Oh, yeah.
size.
Yep.
And then the second question, with that was, and I got one more. Did the bull boat, did it actually make it, or did it?
Yes, the whole
Did
way.
it get waterlogged
Yep.
or anything?
The bull boats, if you read Ashley's journals, they would go about 6 or 7 hours and then pull off and flip them upside down where there's still sunlight to dry them out and tighten them back up. And that's what
Did you guys have to do that?
yeah, we did that.
All right, and then the other one, did I miss, did you talk about the misleading sod adventure?
No, I didn't.
You should-
That's a good one.
Sure, that's.
So, that's a very interesting story. So, on the ride, we are on, huh?
Do you have pictures of it?
Not that spot.
Oh.
So we're on what's called the California Trail, Mormon Trail, Pony Express Trail, something else. And we come to a location called Pacific Springs. And it's called Pacific Springs because there's a spring that comes out of the mountain. And, you know, they're on their way to the Pacific, so Pacific Springs. But there's an old cabin there, an original log cabin, where travelers headed west would stop. And that cabin is still there and dilapidated. But Pacific Springs was also known for a lot of people dying of cholera and other things because that water was had a lot of whatever in it. But there was also good grass there, and so we're out in the middle of this grass area, letting our horses eat. We're all sitting on them, you know, just letting them eat and talking and kind of chewing the fat. And I look down, and the ground is literally moving like a wave. And that's a phenomenon we learned later that the locals told us called a fen, an F-E-N-N. And what happens is the water comes out of the spring, gets under the sod, and it literally lifts the sod right up. So there's the sod and the grass and then water and then, you know, below it. So we're on top of that sod, and I said to Conan, I said, you look down yet? He's like, no, do I want to? I'm like, probably not. And he looks down and he's like, oh, we're screwed. So here we are, 6 guys on horses with 3 pack horses on top of this fen in the middle. And the big debate is, do we go back or do we keep going? And we're like, well, we're halfway. It's, you know, let's go back and ride around it or just go. So we all picked the direction and just kind of started moving our horses. And eventually, I made it through, I think, first, or Jack might on his mule, then I made it through, and my horse, she breaks through the sod, and she's up to her, probably halfway to her withers in the water, and I have to calm her down, and then, you know, she looks back at me like, what are we doing? And so I tell her what we're doing, and we leap out, and then Dixon Barner makes it. They let one pack horse go because they know how to get out of it themselves. Well, one pack horse, Yuma, actually gets in. She breaks through, and she's in over her head. So now she's drowning with 300, 400 pounds of gear on her back. So Conan and a couple other guys jump off their horses. They go in, they get the pack saddles off her, and they kind of stabilize her head. You know, they're up to here in water and holding her. And then Dixon Barner, not only is a veterinarian, he was a professional bull rider, bronc rider, rodeo cowboy before his mother handed him a piece of paper one day and said, sign this, honey. He's like, what is it? And she's like, don't worry about it. And he got accepted into vet school. That's how he got to vet school, literally. So he ties off a rope to his saddle horn and he tries to pull it out. His horse goes over, lands on top of him. He gets pinned under the horse. So we get him up. His horse is fine. He's fine. He ended up with a bum knee. Well, the pack horse is still underwater. So then me and Scott Staggs go running back. We jump in the water. He grabs her by the pack saddle. I grab her by the halter. And eventually the rope. We're able to slide her up on her side on the more floating sod. She catches her breath. And then she breaks through again. But this time her feet touch the ground and she's able to get out. And that was the only real incident that we had in 95 days. And in 95 days, the 3 of us didn't even cut our finger in camp. Not even a finger cut in camp.
Wow, fantastic.
Holy Paul. Yes.
Yeah, did you take your own horse then?
Yeah.
Yeah, your own
Yep.
horse. And then why do you suppose the Indians wouldn't let you go through their res?
Well, so the first res was, it took me about 8 months to find out who the woman was to get permission. So I spoke to her and she goes, oh, but I'm out and we haven't elected a new person, so I can't give you permission. So this is like a month out. Then there is one section up by Fort Smith called Bad Pass, B-A-D Pass. It's been used for like 10,000 years by, you know, Stone Age on, and that's on the Crow Reservation. They wouldn't let us ride that. They have a little fundraising technique, and what they do is you go on their land, they arrest you, they put you in jail, they take all your gear, they give you one of their lawyers, and then you go to trial and you negotiate how much you're going to pay to get everything back. And we're like, yeah, that's not happening. So that took out a couple parts of the trip. So. Diane, did I get your question?
Yeah.
Yep.
Congratulations, man. Wow. What a trip.
It was crazy.
What a
So
trip.
at the end of the day, by the way, Ashley comes back, sells his hides, makes the equivalent in today's dollars of $1 million, and goes into politics. Yeah.
So did you guys ever have occasion to do any hunting at all?
Yeah. We killed some things. Ducks, and we caught fish. I shot ducks on the water with my smooth bore. But no, we did try to kill some antelope, and some prairie grouse, but we couldn't get close enough to get shots. But I mean, we did some. But the reality is, if we wanted to shoot antelope and eat, all the local ranchers would tell you, shoot all you want, because the game wardens will tell you they want so many per this section, and the ranchers are like, yeah, that's twice as many as it can hold, and they would have been like, yeah, shoot all you want. And another funny thing, and I can't remember it now. Oh, Ashley. So, William Ashley, as it turns out, when he dies, actually quite a young guy, he is buried on an Indian mound on his property. To this day, in his trust, in his will, he has secured a 5-inch wide right-of-way from his grave to the Missouri River about a mile through everybody's property that's still on every single deed. And he said, if I ever rise from the dead, I want to be able to walk the Missouri River without trouble. And it's still on every deed. So that's yes.
How are the mosquitoes on the horses? They bother them a lot too?
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. The last night on the horses, getting up towards the Bighorn River by a reservoir, we stopped at one area that had good grass, and the mosquitoes were so thick that they were literally covering the horse's ears and entire face, like wearing a shroud. And you know, and my horse actually got used to me taking my hat off and smacking horse flies without flinching or taking off on me. But they're very bad on the horses. And you get up in the morning, sometimes with the horse flies and all that, and you just got little patches of blood running. And then mornings or evenings, you have to go underneath, and they get used to you doing this. And they're in other regions, but you got to pull all the ticks off. Dozens and dozens of ticks you got to pull off every night. The horses did. I was offered a lot of money for my horse. I won't sell it.
How did your horse get a funny name like that?
So, Amy will appreciate this. So, my buddy gives me a horse, and I have this horse, and Kathy and I are trying to figure out for like a month or two what to name it. He called it Red because it's a red dun. I send a picture down to my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter, Amelia, is looking over her mother's shoulder. She's 3 at the time, and says, "Look, Mommy, Pop got me a horsey for Christmas. I'm going to name it Bubbles." You tell your granddaughter you're not naming it Bubbles. I guess the other cool thing, and I'll leave it with this, and if there's any other questions, we're right on time. One of the coolest sights on the trip was on the horseback, coming up off of, they call it Antelope Lake, it's like a pond. There's antelope, there's cattle, there's elk running, and we come up over the hill. And sitting on the horse within eyesight, there was 7 herds of wild mustangs. And you can see the bell mare, the stallion off to the side, and all 7, probably well over 200 horses, wild mustangs, and that was cool.
Can you have them? Can you catch them?
No, but they catch them and you can adopt them. Would you like one? I'll get you one. They give $1,000 to adopt them, you know. Yeah.
That's Amish there, right? Bottom left.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Amish.
You should tell the little story of training when we were doing the canoe training out in
So,
Allegheny.
so Amish and Jack and my pointer's dead. And Jack and I and Steve went. I think that was it. Just four of
Yeah,
us.
so you and me.
So we're down on the Clarion River in the Allegheny National Forest doing a canoe trip. I think the October 18. And Jack and Amish are in a canoe and we're trying to squirrel in the rocks on the bank of the river. And so Amish, you can't shoot it because it's the rocks, with a muzzle loader, you have a ricochet, all that. So they row over there. And Amish takes his oar and he's trying to stab and kill this squirrel in the rocks. The squirrel grabs a paddle, he pulls the paddle out and jumps